When is your home not really your home, the one you've bought, but you don't own it? When it's leasehold. I'm Martina Lees, and in a happy coincidence with my surname, I'm also the leasehold correspondent for Tortoise. So until not long ago, this was a topic that was something that only, well, in the public perception, dusty solicitors talked about and buyers of flats vaguely considered. But over the last 2 years or so, it's become probably the hottest topic in property. And that's why we are here tonight, to talk about leasehold or chokehold. Feudal laws still govern about a fifth of homes in England and Wales, and are there still a place for them? And the hardships that leaseholds can cause in the 21st century, and what should be done about this? England and Wales are among the last few countries in the world where you can still buy the right to live in a home for typically 125 years. But the real owner remains the freeholder. They have control, and when the lease is up, the property goes back to them. We have William the Conqueror to thank for that. When he invaded about 1,000 years ago, he claimed all of England for the crown, leased estates to his lords, and they, in turn, leased land to tenants, all under strict conditions. And today, this idea allows freeholders to charge service charges for upkeep, high prices for lease extensions, consent fees for any changes, like even changing your mortgage provider or getting a pet, and ground rents, which is really for nothing at all. But instead of phasing out leasehold, we are building more of it. So we have a slide that shows on that chart the proportion of new build that makes up leasehold is 40%, and that's double that 20 years ago. This is not how the rest of the world own flats. So most former British colonies, Scotland, America, Australia, have an alternative system called commonhold. And that means you own your home outright and the common parts jointly with your neighbors. Now, and that gives you an indication over there on how many countries in the world have commonhold. Now the Law Commission, which advises Parliament, is looking at how commonhold can become viable here. And that's one of about 10 different government consultations on leasehold announced in the last 2 years, all with record responses. Last month, the Competition and Markets Authority announced that it's going to investigate mis-selling in leasehold. And any day now, the government is due to respond to a very scathing inquiry by the Parliamentary Select Committee on leasehold, which found that it's unfairly balanced against leaseholders and that the system should be replaced by commonhold. So here tonight is the woman who ignited a lot of this, Katie Kendrick.
Very good.
Katie. So Katie is a nurse in Cheshire, and she bought a leasehold house and then found out that the freehold was sold from underneath them, and then set up a Facebook group, which now has about 14,000 members. So, and their campaigning has galvanized a lot of what I've just talked about. So we're also very lucky to have Sir Peter Bottomley, which is a Conservative MP who has campaigned against leasehold long before it became a hot topic. And he's also the co-chair of the all-parliamentary group on leasehold and commonhold, which has now 165 members, I believe. So, a lot. And then we also have Peter Sugarman, who is worried that he's going to be the bad guy tonight, but I will make sure that he isn't. Peter helps to manage freeholds for about 10,000 of them for pension funds, and he has also written an article for Tortoise from the freeholder perspective. So we're also very fortunate to have a lot of experts in the audience, and I'll make sure everybody gets a chance to say what they think. So a think-in is not the same as a panel discussion. The format is based on a reader conference at a newspaper, so we want all of you to tell us what you think. So we'll use this to inform Tortoise's opinion on Leasehold and also to get more ideas for stories. We'll also be filming this, and that will be edited down so we can share it with people who can't be here tonight, including on social media. So just let us know if you don't want to be on the film. So there are a few rules. The first one is no questions. I won't be too strict on that, but generally we want to hear what you think rather than what you want to ask. Whether you're a newbie at this or an expert doesn't matter. Everybody has a view. So, and secondly, Agatha over there, the tortoise, will tell us when we have to finish. When she reaches the end, that's it, 7:30. So, without delay, I thought I'll start off by asking a question. Katie.
I'll to ask a question.
I am allowed. So, can you tell us what has motivated you to run this campaign and carry on where a lot of people would have given up?
Because I think everybody has the right to own the home that they work so hard for, to own the land that it sits on, and to that they have a mortgage for. It seems absolutely scandalous that somebody else can own the land that your home sits on, and what that actually means in terms of an asset. That should only be your asset as far as I'm concerned, because it's my home and I work for that, nobody else. So what keeps me going is, you know, my personal issue about the leasehold houses may well be fixed in a lot shorter term than the leasehold flats. But what's keeping me going is the abuses of the leasehold flats have been going on for many, many, many more years than what's been for the houses. And it's absolutely outrageous, the abuses that those poor flat leaseholders have to fight. And I think bringing together the voices of leaseholders that the National Leasehold campaign has done has given people the confidence to actually come together and share stories and feel able to speak out, which for many years they haven't been able to do. Because obviously being in a flat, you don't want to upset your neighbours. Being in a house, it's quite different. So, you know, you've got your own independent voice, but when you're in a flat, you don't want to rock the apple cart because you have to live next door to these people. And I think that people have kept quiet for far too long. It's quite fortunate that we've got Facebook and social media, which has helped to motivate people into bringing around changes. You know, the law is the law, but as far as I'm concerned, if a law's broken, it needs fixing. I don't care what the law states. If it's wrong, it needs fixing. And I'm determined to make sure that the laws are there to protect people.
Yeah.
Can we clap?
Peter Sugarman, can I ask you to talk, to just set out what is the rationale from to justify having leasehold in England and Wales if the rest of the world, or most of them, don't have it?
And ground rents.
So I'm the devil incarnate tonight. I appreciate that, but humour me, if you will, for a few minutes. I agree with what has been said in large part. I'm sure I'm going to agree with a lot of what Peter says. There are problems with leasehold, and there are certainly multiple abuses by multiple people within the system. So there's no dispute about that. There's no dispute that these problems need to be addressed. The disagreement is whether we should throw out the whole system or whether we should try and amend it. And I represent a new type of investor. Institutional investors own less than 1% of the property in this country. And pension funds and life insurance companies have a huge problem, And this particular type of investment is one that solves that problem for them. The problem that they have is that they have 60, 70, 80-year liabilities, and they have no suitable asset against which they can set that liability. And they are penalised for the mismatch in what's called the duration, the length of the liability with the length of the asset. And the reason that in the last 3 or 4 years in particular, pension funds and life insurance companies have been large buyers of freehold property is because ground rents give them that asset exposure that they cannot find anywhere else. The only other asset that gives them that exposure is a government long-dated RPI-linked note, which at the moment pays a negative interest rate. Now, when I see that it's written down that ground rents serve no purpose whatsoever, I would say to you that the investors that I represent are only interested in buying this asset because of the ground rent. And I'd like to give you one example of what we have done for one block of flats in our portfolio. We own about 400 buildings, about 10,000 units. And we've had really only 2 serious problem assets in that portfolio. One of those assets is a building that we bought from a developer, and it turns out that the fire insulation was not installed correctly. The sign-offs were given, but they seem to have been obtained fraudulently. The developer is in the process of going bankrupt. The building has roughly 150 flats, of which only 2, maybe 3, have resident leaseholders. The others are buy-to-let investors. Most of them are abroad. We have spent, or are in the process of spending, well over £1 million to fix the fire insulation problems. Now, this problem has not been caused by us. It's caused by the fraudulent behaviour of the developer. The leases actually allow us to pass those costs onto the leaseholders. We are in the process, but the leaseholders, the costs represent roughly 25% of the value of the individual flats. So raising that sort of money for the average leaseholder is hugely challenging. If we did nothing, the fire department would force an evacuation of the building. So what are we doing? We've fronted the money, and we've told the leaseholders we will endeavour to reclaim the money either by suing the developer. If we can prove fraud of the developer, we may be able to break the corporate veil and go after the developer himself. We'll be going after the insurance company. And we may come to you in the end because your leases allow us to recover that if we've gone through a tribunal process. But there's no reason why you should be evicted through no fault of your own. And it's unreasonable that somebody shouldn't step in. And we are, we believe, being paid to take that risk by receiving the ground rent. Now, I am not saying that every freeholder behaves as we are behaving, and that is a problem. Yeah. But this is an asset which, were there not to be a ground rent, the pension fund and life insurance companies would not buy. The only reason that they are buying this asset is because of the ground rent. The service charge doesn't interest them. They're not trying to run a profit on that. They're only interested in something, the cash flows from the ground rent. And those cash flows can be relatively tiny. One of the points that I'm sure is going to be brought up later is that these evil developers have imposed doubling ground rents. And I'd just like to put that in perspective. If you have a doubling ground rent every 25 years, you have something which equates to a 3.5% annual increase. 3.5% is not much above the annual rate of inflation. And if it had been kept at 25 years, I don't think that we'd have had many of the problems. By imposing ground rents doubling at 10 years and having high ground rents at the beginning, we've had all sorts of problems, and they're absolutely, I sympathise 100% with anyone who's in that position. I think they should sue their solicitors, I think they should sue the developers, but I don't think that represents a fundamental flaw of the system.
Okay.
One last, sorry, I've spoken for too long, but I haven't answered your question.
It's very good. Keep going.
Okay.
Briefly.
Briefly, right. So why leasehold, why not common hold? The structure of the property market in this country is completely different from that in many other countries. We have far more buy-to-let, small buy-to-let investors. We have far more blocks with non-resident tenants, and we have far lower levels of institutional ownership. And therefore, to try and equate what happens in the US or Australia or wherever with the UK is not necessarily relevant. I've lived in blocks of flats in America, I've lived in blocks of flats on the continent, and there are problems there. There are problems wherever you have a large block of flats and you have some people who are going to sell the flat this time next year, and you have some people who are going to be there for 20 years, and some people who think that they're going to give it to their kids and they'll be there for 70 years. Because individual owners have different periods of ownership, they have different views about maintenance of buildings. Enough said.
So,
I think it's a round of applause for that.
who would like to respond to that?
I'll respond to it.
I would, but please go ahead.
Can you?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I'm really glad that...
Can you say who you are and what your
just say your
experience
name.
is?
Yes, my name is Kareem. I live in West London. I'm an academic. I'm a consultant, and I grew up in France, continental Europe, which obviously has a very, very different system.
Are you a leaseholder?
I am indeed, and in the sense that in France, they don't have a ground rent at all. They have a land tax, which benefits local authorities. This is a very important point. I would like to respond to what you've just said. I have to say I disagree with your statement that there are problems with leasehold. I think that leasehold in itself is the problem. So first of all, I disagree on that point. I think the whole premise of leasehold is deeply, deeply unfair, because as you know full well, ground rents sell for anything from 500 to up to £5,000, and the person or the investor who bought the ground rent for £5,000 gets to control an asset. And I again disagree with the fact that investors only buy leasehold for the ground rent income. I know that because I have a banking background, I know that ground rents are assimilated to sort of long-term government bonds, and they provide the sort of steady income that pension funds are after. But I totally disagree with the fact that investors only buy for the ground rent income. I think, by buying the ground rent, you also get ownership of the lease terms. And the lease terms, as you know, the covenants give you access to a lot of other income streams, okay? You often get the right to appoint the managing agent.
I think it's fair to say that freeholders divided into, let's say, two simple groups, the sorts of ones he knows about and the ones that we know about. So I think we shouldn't condemn all freeholders. Is that fair?
Yes,
Carry on.
of course. Yeah,
Yes,
I'd like to respond, but yes, yeah.
Yes, the other thing about pension funds, I think pension funds, obviously, behind pension funds, you have regular people like you and me.
Yes.
Okay? So these are people who earn a wage and income, and they delegate, part of their long-term savings to a fund manager, obviously there are trustees, etc. What I'm trying to say is that pension funds can always find other investments. They can take their money elsewhere.
Yeah.
So I disagree with the fact, that there's a problem. So this is another thing I disagree with. The problem we have in England, and I think this is a very English problem, is the property market is no longer about people. I think this is really about investments, providing income streams to investors who very often, increasingly, tend to be offshore investors, meaning they don't contribute very much to this country, to very, very complex schemes, lawyers, tax advisors. I mean, it's a whole industry, let's face it. And this is, so I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bravo, bravo.
So,
What's that?
Sebastian,
Say who you are.
Sebastian Kelly from the Leasehold Knowledge Partnership.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you very much indeed for speaking. It's a freehold to a meeting like this. I congratulate you for doing so. So Peter Bottom, indeed, James Breckenshaw and various other MPs will know how difficult it is to get any kind of comment from freeholders and freehold owning interests in this country. I've just been taking up a case with Long Harbour. Long Harbour's chief executive absolutely refuses to respond to my very reasonable questions about issues concerning a forfeiture case which is going on.
Oh.
So I'm very glad indeed that you have come forward, and I really do pay tribute to you.
Just for background, it's a £400 ground rent not paid. Person stupidly away, didn't pay it. £2,000 of costs, go to the county court, get a judgment for forfeiture.
And the flat's worth 800,000.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's this kind of stuff that is nonsense. Peter, you talked. One thing I'm very keen on is you obviously buy these freeholds for your institutional investors, not private equity, as you're making clear. Would it be the case that your sorry, I'm allowed to ask questions, but a question that would be interesting is your fund paid for by the permission and consent fees involved in administering these ground rents, these freehold interests, as is the case with Wallace Estates and Long Harbour, for example, or are you simply remunerated a flat annual fee by the freeholders?
Neither.
Okay, well, at some point, perhaps you would address that. And the other thing is that this loan that you were going to make, well, I take it is a loan to remove the cladding.
It's not cladding, but it's
Defects.
I mean, were there no other source of income to pay for that, you would indeed take the leaseholders to court and you'd get them to pay. Basically, under the lease, they'd almost certainly have to pay, correct?
Probably, yes.
Very good. Thank you.
My name is Agnes Kori. I'm a music teacher, musicologist, fighting not to be forfeited at the moment.
That's what it says on your T-shirt. Bella Bartok Centre for Musicians.
Yeah, that's me. It is true, in defense of Mr. Sugarman, that if honorable people operate the leasehold system, it's not that bad. I bought my flat I thought I bought my flat 44 or 45 years ago, and the first 35 years were okay, until a different set of people took over who, in my opinion, are totally fraudulent, definitely don't care about the human costs, and yeah, they want me out, and they use all the tricks in the book, and the leasehold laws seem to allow it. And I just would like to add something which is so contradictory and just so wrong, that it's not my flat according to the law, it can be taken away from me. But although I'm low income, under the lowest taxable band, I can't get the upper tribunal court fee free of charge, or I can't get pro bono lawyers.
The law is not accessible to you.
Because they say that, but you have your flat that's worth £400,000, so you've got assets. So on one hand, it might be taken away from me at any minute. On the other hand,
You're stuck.
yeah.
And the tribunals, can I just add, It is quite well known from the sources that I contacted that the tribunals are actually still favouring the freeholder and the managing agents. And our block has been through a tribunal process which was a complete farce, to be honest, because they distorted all our evidence. And the decision, even if we appealed, we just didn't go to appeal because we just expected the same thing. Because you have to ask for permission to appeal and to pay money, and then again, as the lady said, it's quite expensive to get that. The law should be simplified so that the leaseholders who have problems have very easy access to justice and for things to be rectified without prejudice towards the freeholder and the managing agent.
Sorry, can you just say your name, please?
Maria.
Well, one of the things that might be worth getting someone to say is if you take lease extensions, which affects a significant number, how it comes about that one upper property tribunal decision, unless successfully appealed, can change the costs. So millions of people, when they need to extend their leases, and maybe James Parthenia could say a word about that.
Yes, James has, if I can just give a little bit of background, James has tried to change the way that lease extensions costs are calculated. So then I'll let him talk about that.
Thank you very much. I actually do very little lease extension work, and a few years ago found the market evidence that showed that the relativity we've been using to set leasehold prices was incorrect, and the graphs to determine the leasehold prices, which were pretty much all put together by freeholders or valuers acting for freeholders, underpriced or undervalued leaseholders' property quite significantly. And at the upper tribunal we found that the graph that many people have relied upon was actually an arbitrary hand-drawn line sponsored by the Grosvenor estate. Unfortunately, the upper tribunal found against us, and the Court of Appeal also found against us. Lord Justice Lewison, who actually refused us permission to appeal in the first instance, sat on the Court of Appeal.
What called prejudice?
I wouldn't say that at all. I'm sure he can look past these things. But he quoted Justice Hoffman. I think it's a very good quote, because he said, it's an open market. It may be a false market based upon false assumptions, but it is still the open market. In other words, we had, through our hard work and our peer-reviewed research of market evidence, accepted by the Royal Economic Society, peer-reviewed and top-ranked journals, showed that people were overpaying by 30 to 40 or even 50% to extend their leases or buy their freehold. But the judge said, it may be false, and it may be a false market, but it is not the court's decision or job to actually change market practice. Now, there's a Latin phrase which basically fiat justitia or which says, let justice be done though the heaven falls. Oh. Now, it seems that justice was not done in our case, and as Louis knows, now the freeholders are actually pushing even lower relativity, which means that the cost of extending your lease or buying a freehold for millions of people has gone up. Now,
without Parliament saying a word.
Yes.
Yes, without Parliament saying a word. And that's the problem. You have individual leaseholders who cannot take on the might of the great estates. And as Louis and I and various other valuers know, you have an individual leaseholder, the cost of going to the tribunal is well, not extortionate, it's very expensive. And if you have a point of principle, as we had, you have to go to the upper tribunal, potentially to the Court of Appeal and beyond. Well, that's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds, if not millions. And most leaseholders do not have the money to do it. They cannot afford to do it, they don't have the time, they don't have the willpower to do it, because it wears you down.
And most leases say that you have to pay the freeholders' costs anyway, whether they win or lose.
And if you think, we actually started the legal procedure in 2013.
Feudal system.
And we only got the ruling last year at the Court of Appeal in 2018. That was 5 years. And so we're now in a situation, thankfully, thanks to Sir Peter and Sebastian Martin here, that the government has taken note, the Law Commission is looking into these matters. and hopefully we will get reform. But by our calculations, leaseholders are overpaying by about £14 million a month, thanks to erroneous relativity graphs. Simply because Lord Justice Lewison said it's not the job of the courts to overturn a market based upon false assumptions.
What is the purpose
Can you
of the
take
court?
the matter to the European Court?
No, because we refused permission to appeal.
Can I give Louis Burns a chance?
Yeah,
Louis, can you just explain what you do?
Oh, sorry, Louis Burns, Leasehold Solutions. I'm manager of the Leasehold Group. There's an intrinsic problem with leaseholders that everyone's pointing out, that it is, however you carve it up, it's a hugely unjust system that favours freeholders categorically. And it's true to say that not all freeholders are bad. There are some good ones. However, they could all be bad if they wanted to be. And that highlights an error in law. So you have, as the French gentleman said there, a developer builds 100 flats. They sell for £300,000, the lease each. The leaseholders pay £30 million for that building. And then a freeholder might come in and pay £3,000 per flat. He now owns that building, the bricks and mortar. The leaseholders, they don't own a single brick of that building. They are renting a space inside a building by way of a lease. Freeholder owns the building, the land it sits on, the air rights above, the ground rights below. And that gives him, through the lease, an absolute power to get the ground rent, which is for nothing. And so our argument is, well, the ground rent keeps people who've got money interested because they're making money, therefore they're interested. Lease extensions, as James says, huge money and huge amounts of effort putting in to squeeze even more money out of leaseholders. Arguments about relativity, about, well, not so much deferment rates, but the new battle that we're involved with, capitalisation rates. So while some pension funds are saying, you know, we're custodians of the building, we're the nice guys, we've done these amazing things, they are spending, as we speak today, they are spending hundreds of thousands of pounds to try and set case law to alter a capitalisation rate, which has been the least thing we fight over for the last 30 years, which is always between 6 and 7%. They're desperate to set a cap rate, which is around 2.35%. So for people like Katie and those hundreds of thousands of people who have long leases and ground rents linked to the retail price index, it would 3 times what she would pay for lease extension. And this has all been done quietly. It's complicated. They argue these complex, it's linked to 25-year index-linked gilts and yields from auctions. It's a construct, it's nonsense. Those freeholders can forfeit a flat if the person who lives in that flat owns £10 ground rent arrears for more than 3 years, or any amount of ground rent arrears for more than 3 years. They can forfeit the flat, i.e. take it off somebody. If they contravene the terms of their lease and they do some renovation, or they sublet it, or the building, their flat was used for illegal purposes and they didn't know about it, they can forfeit their flat. Yeah. It's disproportionate, it's ridiculous. And just let me finish, all the terms of the lease say, well, when a freeholder, they ask you for licenses and permissions to sublet, keep a pet, turn over left in bed at night time. When you pay for those fees have to be reasonable. So we say, well, the law says they're reasonable, and if not, just take them for this first tier tribunal. And that's where it falls down, because to fight a freeholder who is a multimillionaire or a billionaire whose fees in tribunal are tax deductible, and you're a leaseholder and you have to pay to fight these people who will appeal to upper tribunal just to set precedents for their whole portfolios, it is a true David and Goliath battle. Leasehold is intrinsically wrong. We do not need an asset class. You don't need someone making hundreds of millions of pounds a year profit to simply put a managing agent in place. You can do that yourself.
Can I just give a concrete example of this, of a freeholder that would ordinarily be regarded as highly ethical? I'm talking about the Wellcome Trust, second biggest charity in the world.
Who says they're ethical?
Well, they do lots of very good work. However, they also own 55 acres of Kensington.
They bought the Henry Smith Charity.
Henry Smith Charitable Trust.
Property, sorry.
Property, it's 55 acres of it. And they took a woman she was a fairly argumentative and fully paid up member of the awkward squad, I would say. She owed 6,000 quid and she wouldn't pay her service charges. Of £6,000, she lived in a flat worth about 800,000 in Onslow Square. She was taken to court and the Wellcome Trust, actually Knight Frank, who actually knew what they were doing in property management, spent £114,000 on counsel and solicitors to splatter this woman around the court for 4 days of hearings. Everybody in that room would have known 5 minutes after that case started, this woman is a complete loser, this is a leasehold car crash, and she's going to be picking up the bill for this catastrophic, misconceived bit of litigation, i.e. withholding the money. I'm constantly advising leaseholders, pay, even when it's the most ridiculous demand. Pay, always pay first, fight second. That way you avoid catastrophic legal fees. In this case, £114,000 to get back 6.
Pre-spent, before they got there.
Before they got there. Made no sense whatsoever. But everybody in that court, including the Wellcome Trust, would have known perfectly well that she was going to pick up that tab. There was no way a litigant in person was going to win against a team of barristers. And the only reason that that property wasn't forfeited was because we got to hear of it, tipped off the Guardian, involved Peter Bottomley and other politicians, and as ever, with this ghastly, murky world of leasehold, the freeholders ran for cover, ran for the shade, and wouldn't take that property offer in the full glare of publicity, which I can assure you we would have created.
One point which matters, which doesn't, I think, apply to your clients,
it doesn't,
is that every residential freeholder should have a named person in the United Kingdom who can be required to answer questions. Every single one. No hiding behind Long Harbour and Adriatic and many of the other people. There needs to be a named person in the accounts given to every leaseholder, and therefore to all the rest of us who are looking on, who is accountable. Because the embarrassment factor is a seriously good one. And I don't go into the details of a case last week where an agent was putting enormous costs on, and we then discovered that by asking questions, thanks to the campaigning charity LKP, things started getting right quite fast. And the other thing to remember, by the way, for those of us who are trying to give advice to leaseholders, residential leaseholders in trouble, is we are not soft on them. If they've done something which is wrong or stupid, we say so. It's not a one-sided thing. It's trying to make, while we've got the system, to make it work. And if I can add one or two more points, if I may. Peter Sugarman has rightly raised the question of how pension funds, insurance companies can match their long-term liabilities with long-term streams of income. It is up to the public decision-making process to make more new assets available which do produce this sort of income. For example, in many other countries, people like my trade union who have my money, my insurance company, my pension company, invest in places to rent. And rental income, whether it's commercial property or sometimes retail or residential, should be that kind of stream of income at normal kinds of commercial returns with the market influencing it. So we ought to be saying, as I have for the last 40 years, and I say again now, why don't we say to all these people who hold our money, invested in things where ordinary people get work, but homes for ordinary people, at rents which people, there may be things which need sorting out, but that is a better way than artificially saying it's ground rent which should make a difference. I go on to talk about Bob Bessel, who is now a trustee of LKP, the Leasehold Knowledge Partnership campaigning charity, who developed 1,600 retirement homes, not a single one of which has a ground rent. Because he says, what's the ground rent for? If it doesn't produce anything of benefit to the person who lives there, what's it for? And the answer is no reason. It came up by chance. It used to be about £20. In fact, I declare that in Worthing, my constituency, I bought a flat which had a ground rent of £20. After 25 years, it doubled to £40. After another 5 years or so, the freeholder said, will you buy it? We did. No problem. So I'm a freeholder, I'm a leaseholder, we get on perfectly well. We're a good managing agent, no problems. I'm buying a leasehold property being developed near my home in London And I said to the people, how do I get to know the other leaseholders? They said, what do you mean? I said, well, when we come to move in 3 years' time, I want to be able to have an association. We don't sort of look forward to that. I said, how do I know you're not going to scam me on the insurance commissions? We don't do that. I said, put the words St George's Wharf scandal in your search engine, and you'll find that the Barclay Group paid £1 million to their leaseholders. It's on the LKP website. Explained they had done that. And if a respectable company like Barclay can do that, what about the ones who are not respectable? What about the people like Martin Payne, who would buy up declining leaseholds, offer a leaseholder an informal lease extension? With a formal one, you reset the ground rent to 0. He managed to disguise more than once on some properties, getting through solicitors, that the ground rents were going to be doubling from the time the lease was first granted, which might have been 1950. So people were paying £14,000 ground rent on a flat worth about £120,000. People like Martin Payne, that was crooked. There are other people, like the Cengiz interest, I talk about Cengiz, I'm not talking about each Cengiz individually or necessarily each one of the companies, but the Cengiz interest defined broadly, involved in the old Peveril with the Cyrus Call system, where they ripped off millions of pounds from tens of thousands of leaseholders and were let off by the Competition and Market Authority, the Serious Fraud Office, the police, and everybody else, because they said, we've been crooked, and by the way, 2 or 3 other people have, the fact that they were 99.5% of the whole thing and the other were half of 1%, they got let off by the whole system. I want to say to people here what you know perfectly well, which was until Gavin Barwell became Minister for Housing, the first 10 years or so of campaigning by Martin Boyd, Sebastian O'Kelly, and then helped by Katie and her campaign from the Northwest, and Victoria Derbyshire, and Patrick Collinson, The Guardian, and various others, and I now include Martina from the Sunday Times and from Tortoise. Until then, civil servants didn't know what was going on, partly because the Minister of Justice, who was supposed to promote commonhold, didn't understand the problems and had no resources, partly because the 1.5 civil servants in what was then the Ministry of Housing, or what it was called, didn't actually think it was a particular problem, and housing ministers didn't listen. Gavin Barwell changed that, and that's why we've now got these various inquiries. It's not enough to know the problems. It's not enough to know the solutions. What we need is the overwhelming minority who will produce a tsunami that will make 3/4 of the problems go away. One of that is the Competition and Market Authority declaring some terms in leases unfair and void. So, for example, it ought to be voided that leaseholders have to pay the costs of freeholders in most cases. Obviously, if they're facing a vexatious case from one leaseholder, there's a problem in that sort of area. But for most things, that sort of term should be reviewable, not just automatic. A second is people need to remember what Tom Denning did when he was Master of the Rolls, who stepped down from the top court, what was now the Supreme Court, now then Judicial Committee of the House of Lords, to become Master of the Rolls, chaired the appeal court for the civil side, and would often persuade another judge to agree with him that something may be law but it wasn't justice, so it was wrong. That was normally overturned. One day someone said to him, Tom, do you know they've upheld one of your more surprising judgments? And he shook his head sadly and said, I thought something I was right. If we've got a case where the law is not the same as justice, it's a public policy and a parliamentary duty, and I would argue a legal duty, to make justice become the law. And in this we have to. So on Peter's main point, where can the income stream come from? I would argue it's residential rentals, otherwise. I would say that the Select Committee report was brilliant, and they produced this expression lease rental rather than leasehold, because it is only rental, including change. And you've got to declare unfair terms unfair and void and unenforceable.
Brilliant.
Hello, I'm Anne Heelan, and I'm a former leaseholder, but now sort of campaigning for a reform system. I really commend you, Mr. Sugarman, for coming in to face us all.
No problem. I'm happy to.
I'm sure
be the whipping boy.
Realization that unfortunately, investing in an asset such as this, which is on a moral level quite toxic, as you can see. And where my problem really is with leasehold is the whole mis-selling of it. So I owned a leasehold flat. I bought a leasehold flat in a conversion. And the freeholder had a huge investment portfolio, and basically what he did ultimately was leverage his power over me to force me to sell to him, and I lost £100,000. I took him to the High Court, he entered no defence, he played around, and then he created new obstacles. And I just think it's disgraceful. So, none of us here, none of us leaseholders are stupid, and there's an awful lot of victim blaming going on in this game about how, we got ourselves into it. We didn't realise that it was an investment vehicle that we could accrue some income from, growing the equity. We were buying our homes, and especially in London with regards to flats, so many of the flats are leasehold, and we're told, oh, the only thing you need to worry about is the length of the lease, and anything that screams out obvious in the lease, that's bad. So I didn't have the sharpest tool in the box, conveyancing lawyer. I was, busy with other things at the time and expecting her to do her job. And I wasn't told, expressly told, which I think people instinctively know when they're buying or looking at commercial premises for leases for sale on commercial premises. They say to let, lease for sale. And really what I'm aiming for with my campaigning is so that when people are buying a flat, that they go lease for sale on the flat. And so yes, they could then have a long-term rental where you're then getting your equivalent of your ground rent, but they know they don't really own it. We know anybody walking down the street, a 12-year-old kid, when they see a commercial premises for sale, they'll know it's the leases being sold. And it's all so muddied and so murky and so septic, this whole industry, that when you're buying a leasehold flat, you don't know that you're not buying the flat. So that's really my issue.
I absolutely agree with everything you said, Anne, and I think the term lease rental would be fabulous if we could adopt that and moving forward, so that people actually know what it is that they're entering into. I know that I lease my car, I know that I don't own that car. I had no idea that I didn't own my house, and it's very much the same for flats. So I think that'll be a massive step forward if we could get people to adopt and advertise these properties for actually what they are. So what they say on the tin should be what we are purchasing.
At the back there.
Yeah, my name's Eugene Finlay. Just got recently interested in the campaign. I'm trying to extend my lease, and surprise, surprise, my landlord isn't very cooperative, which is okay. But I think what the lady said there is quite right. I think actually when the terminology people use, they go to an estate agent and they talk about buying a house or buying a flat, I think it's all crazy because it's the wrong terminology that people are using. And I think when people are actually buying a lease, there should be a statutory health warning, if you like. If I buy something, a fridge or anything like that, I get told that it's guaranteed for 12 months or whatever the case may be. When someone's buying their home, there should be a warning. And it's up to conveyance and solicitors to actually do that. But I think it should be a statutory warning. And I think the gentleman from France, I think at the end of the day, this system can't be made fair because it's impossible. It has to be abolished. And I think tinkering around at the edges and talking about, well, this is an investment vehicle. There's, lots of things that could be an investment vehicle. Maybe slavery at one time was an investment vehicle. Tobacco was an investment vehicle. Exploitation of children 2 centuries ago, a century ago, working in factories for 18 hours. That was an investment vehicle. But it shouldn't be about people wanting investment. It should be about a basic human right of actually being able to buy your home, whether it's a house or a flat, and having the confidence that in 5 or 10 years' time, some trickster isn't going to say, hey, you owe me money. For example, talking of full feature, I think it was about a year ago, someone owed ground rent. It was £2 a year. They went abroad, they owed £10, and the landlord just done a forcible entry. They went to court and it got overturned because it was construed by the court that they hadn't actually legally asked for it in the correct format. But all that is all tinkering around with the system. You can't make something that's basically unfair fair by playing around with little rules. And I think a real job of education is needed for the man and woman in the street.
Brilliant.
My name is Vicky. I just would like to echo what the last two speakers have said. I'm from Scotland. We don't have leasehold in Scotland, and just to show you how totally ignorant I was, and I'm not a stupid person, I had bought a house. So, you know, I come from Scotland, we don't have leasehold, bought a house in London, then bought a flat to really kind of show you how little I knew. I bought a flat with a 76-year lease. I didn't know about marriage value. Even as basic as that, I did not know. So immediately, it was thousands and thousands of pounds to increase the lease. And then, within a year, they did major works, which weren't really major. Just not, you know, a bit of pointing, whatever. And it's a conversion of 9 units. My bill for that was another £15,000. So suddenly the flat that I had bought, I'm paying thousands of pounds for a lease increase, and I'm paying thousands of pounds for a bit of pointing and whatever else. They use their own company, because they've got their own insurance company, brokers, and they're into big social housing as well. So we're in a very nice area, nice conversion. We're paying for them for their tenants' evictions, for risky clients, risky areas. As I say, they've got their own building company. They collected all the money from us. They own 4 of the 9, so they're very clever because we can't franchise. They know exactly what they're doing. So they use us to subsidise them. They then went into liquidation, having collected all our money. They owed a fortune to people. That's just one thing I'd like to say. The other thing, again...
Just to stop you, this is one of the very few areas where other people's money doesn't have to be put into trust accounts where it's safe.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And just, again, our homes should be our investments for our children and our families, not for vultures that are sweeping around. I know, all right, pensions, I know you discussed pensions, but there are vultures that are circling, and all this help to buy, shared ownership. It is what people, I mean, I've been to a few of these sites. People, young people are walking in, so excited, so excited. They just don't know the, I mean, I'm going to cry if they're sick. They don't know the nightmare. They're walking into the place, going to get worse.
Thank you, Vicky. We're running out of time, so...
Very brief. My name's Jay, I'm a leaseholder. I was in Martina's last Home Truths article. And just to update, on the mental health side, my neighbour, friend, she was repossessed yesterday. She can't come back to the flat, she won't visit me. She's stressed out, the anxiety, pain. It's been months that she's saying to me she wants to kill herself. And she's now trying to get back on the ladder of facing bankruptcy. And the only thing that I could say to her for comfort is, at least the freeholder didn't take it from the forfeiture that we received.
Who took it?
The bank. Because that was the next step.
The lender.
The lender. There was no way out.
Thank you.
It doesn't make any difference.
Thank you for contributing that.
Yeah. Who would like to?
Those two.
Harry.
Thank you for coming today. I just wanted to pick up on one point.
You can say again who you are.
I'm Harry Scoffin. This has taken over my life for the last year and a half. I'm the son of a abused leaseholder. It's a famous case. I'm not going to mention it, but it's in Jim Fitzpatrick's constituency, London Docklands. Leaseholders are basically in a monopolistic situation, and when it comes to, you make the point that third-party freeholders they can take the long view. Now, when you've got 999-year leases, they have minimal reversionary value, and actually, and in our particular case, we've got the 25% rule, which basically means we don't have the right to buy the guy out, and we also don't have the right to manage. And the only right we have is a section 24, which is a court-appointed manager. I've just come from the property tribunal today, and the landlord, I've got to be careful with what I say, but it looks like he's trying to blow up the management order. He is the...
This is the very tricky case that some people know about. Yeah.
And he's withheld £3.1 million in shared service fund. So you look at me today, and I understand there's a pension fund element there, but you don't know who you're jumping into bed with when you buy, and I say buy in inverted commas. You have no rights. And even this sterling parliamentary report that we're saying is brilliant, it still doesn't understand mixed use. Actually, you have a very divergent interest, and we found on our site, we are paying for the degreasing of the hotel ovens underneath us. We're paying for the leaks on the full floor. Actually, this idea that you need this noble custodian, it's a mirage.
It raises a separate question, which we can but time go into, which was whether there should be a fit and proper person test. Because if you strike that person out, then the court order will work and the rest will come.
We have time for maybe 2 or 3 more short ones.
Yeah, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Lorna. I'm also a leaseholder. I essentially bought my property in July 2017. First time buyer.
New build or second hand?
New build. First time buyer, new build. Okay? Had no idea what I was really walking into whatsoever. And even my father checked over terms and conditions with the police and thought absolutely fine. Now there are stages in the process that are absolutely broken, which I've recognised. Right, the salesperson in the, in the sales suite, right, said, right, your service charge is going to be this. Absolutely seems reasonable at that time, okay? And when it comes to it, when you've actually bought into your property and you get your first service charge bill, that's already gone up by £600. Where the hell has that come from? Oh, it affects me. So that's another trick that they do. Solicitor, naively, I used to develop a solicitor, okay? They weren't honest from the start.
Actually, that will save you in the long run, because PPI claims are going to be dwarfed by this, and absolutely should be.
Didn't explain about honest ground rent. Didn't explain that I may struggle to sell my home in the future, because obviously this is not ever going to be my permanent home. And then, funny enough, this year in January, he said, "Oh, I thought your service charges were a little high for development." Well, thanks very much. You should have advised me back in July 2017. Service management company, the developer appointed a management company that has a poor reputation. I've done my research on this management company, and it's absolutely horrendous and shocking. How has a developer got away with appointing a poor service management company? Corrupt, immoral practices. And with a bit of investigation work, we've uncovered a hell of a lot, and we pointed this out to the developer. To the point now the developer said, well, remove said company. That was back in Feb 2019. We are still waiting. And they've also failed to install a lot of services and taken a hell of a lot of money away from us as well. Now, my last final point, because I've been fighting this for the last several months on behalf of the residents here, is we've had issues with getting things fixed on our site. Since we have moved in, and now the developer has gone, not our problem anymore, it's the service management company that's got to fix it. Guess where those costs are going to go to? The leaseholders. Why should we be fixing for their mistakes? I had a very frustrated conversation with NHBC yesterday. He said, right, we're in partial service. Oh great, fantastic. Okay, we're going to go to the freeholder. When the freeholder? Freeholder's having none of it. Where do I go next? Oh, you're going to have to go and get a solicitor. Okay, more costs to the leaseholder. Leaseholders shouldn't be having to go through this. This is causing an unimaginable amount of anxiety, pretty much, and mental health issues across, my residents who are concerned how much their bill is going to be next. What are they going to be charged for next? Okay, with the failed services, we've got a massive rat infestation now, down to the management company mismanaging the site. I have had a leaseholder absolutely in tears and can't go outside on a balcony because she's had rats on her balcony. And we're having to pay up to pick up those costs.
And we need to remember that over half of the new homes being built in this country are leasehold, with the potential of all the same problems. If we're going to get to wrap up,
I need to wrap up.
Just finish off. I've also served, I'm an army reserve, and I've served 2 tours in Afghanistan. you know, to save up for my property. I've already got a lot of stress in my life because my sister, I'll be honest with everyone, my sister's dying from incurable cancer. And I'm having to take this home with me on a daily basis to fight for my, you know, on behalf of residents, but also for the fact is I'm also having to make sure that the site is managed properly because the service management company can't do their job.
Right, Agatha has reached the finish line, so that means I'm going to just sum up what we've heard tonight. So we've heard several people saying that you can't fix a system that is fundamentally unfair. And I was really struck by several people saying, I didn't know what I was buying. Vicky from Scotland, you as a first-time buyer, and the anxiety that comes from that. So it was very interesting to hear Peter Sugarman's views on why this is an attractive asset, but does that justify the existence of a system like this? Peter said that we have a different property market in this country where there's a lot of buy-to-let and a lot of it's owned abroad, but does that mean we have to carry on like this and make it even more attractive, or do we have to present an alternative option? So I think the room, most of the people here agree that we do have to start with something new, with Commonwealth, to give an alternative option of owning. At the moment, you don't have that option if you buy a flat. The only way you can own it is leasehold. So it was just also very striking to hear from people like Agnes, who's facing forfeiture of her home, and the unfair battle and how it is stacked against leaseholders when even James couldn't get anywhere after 5 years, and it is so hard to access pro bono lawyers for someone like Agnes. So what do we want to see? We do want to see unfair terms voided by the Competition Market Authority. We want there to be a statutory requirement to clearly set out what you are buying and not leave that to the solicitors or the freeholders to tell you.
Exactly.
And we want to be able to see that there's fairness and that property is not something that is an asset class, but something that is yours, your home.
How is this achieved?
And well, Parliament and public pressure and public awareness, which is where the media have come in. Without the media, we wouldn't go as far as we have, and particularly without the people in Justin Mellor's constituency and others from the Northwest who used the freehold houses scandal to actually open up the whole thing, to get the ground rents reset, both for new, if leasehold continues at all, and to find a way of saying that whatever your existing ground rent is, within a short period of time, it's going to come down to something which is either manageable or negligible, and that's going to require a bit of residential asset revaluing, but that happens anyway. And people should not criticise you or your
No,
people ought to have realised that what looks too good to be true is too good to be true, and that applies to investors as much as it does to the poor old leaseholders who are the ones who've really suffered. Thank you for your opportunity.
Sorry, we've touched on the mental health aspect, and I don't know, the National List Campaign are running a mental health survey at the minute, so if you can encourage all your neighbours and so on and so forth to fill that in, that would be much appreciated, because it's an area that hasn't been captured, how much this leasehold issues are impacting on people's overall mental health and well-being. We get the loss of financial income, this, that and the other, but we need to capture the mental health element. So if you could complete that, that would be really good. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Thank you, Tortoise.